Just lately, Colonel Fitzwilliam is Mr. Darcy's cousin and is joined in custody with Mr. Darcy of Mr. Darcy's much younger sister, Georgiana. And Lady Catherine de Bourgh is Mr. Darcy's rather unpleasant aunt. At long last, Colonel Fitzwilliam's regiment was returned from the continent. It had been above 2 years since he had last secured leave, and he spent his few weeks' leisure in Derbyshire. Colonel Fitzwilliam had, therefore, not paid his annual visit to Rosings for several years, as was long his custom. These visits were necessarily not so pleasant as formerly, occurring now as they must without Darcy's companionship. By an implicit mutual understanding, the Colonel's company without Mr. Darcy was not so agreeable to Lady Catherine, so his visits had been correspondingly shortened in duration following the Darcy's marriage. As he had long been in the habit of attending upon his aunt each year, the Colonel's honorable nature would not admit of a complete amendment arising solely from a loss of pleasure to himself. Accordingly, he went to Rosings at an early opportunity with the conviction that a labor sooner undertaken is a labor sooner done. A naturally more patient man than his cousin Mr. Darcy, Colonel Fitzwilliam bore Lady Catherine's obtrusiveness and his cousin Anne's obmutescence with better philosophy and hence better grace. Within a few days of his arrival at Rosings, Lady Catherine would abridge her instructions for his welfare to not more than 3 or 4 an hour, and Miss de Bourgh might proffer a few vapid remarks if Lady Catherine should happen to be momentarily absent. In the first instance, Colonel Fitzwilliam's very existence without such constant instruction was nothing short of wonderful, given his occupation as a military man. And in the second, it required the cunning of Ulysses and the strength of Atlas to produce the shortest of speeches from Anne, and these transitory rewards were delivered with neither information nor sensibility. The officiousness of his aunt had become too commonplace to be wondered at, but Miss de Bourgh's inalterable habit of lapsing into a steadfast silence the moment Lady Catherine reappeared, regardless of the state of any preceding conversation, never ceased to surprise the Colonel, who considered such behavior as singular, well past the point of incivility. More than once did Colonel Fitzwilliam compare his two cousins, concluding that the one lady was silent from her great desire to please, whilst the other from her equally strong desire not to please. One evening soon after his arrival, upon finding themselves sitting alone after supper, Lady Catherine addressed him thus. "Well, George, 'tis a dreadful business about Darcy, but as they are married, I suppose there's nothing to be done about it now. I have long been resigned to the disgrace attending this deplorable alliance, but as you know, my sympathy is never directed toward my own complaints. However, Anne yet suffers the disappointment attending Darcy's selfish violation of all claims of honor and duty to his family, an affliction I do not intend to brook any longer. As my first duty is to my daughter, I must no longer suspend decision as the best alternate course for her happiness. These 5 years are now passed without any change in Anne's inclination to marriage, and it occurs to me as the most sensible, indeed as the only acceptable alternative, that I should give my consent to your marriage with my daughter. To be sure, you have no fortune, and therefore no prospect of marriage with anyone in her rank and situation in life. Her beauty and person are superior, her accomplishments unsurpassed, and as my daughter, she would be a match far above any you could hope to make without the benefit of the interest which, as a younger son, you are unlikely to receive." Colonel Fitzwilliam was taken entirely by surprise and could only stare with unaffected astonishment as she continued. "In considering your own recommendations, I know your disposition to be good and your family excellent. My own observation leads me to conclude that, as Anne cannot be the wife of Mr. Darcy, to become the wife of Colonel Fitzwilliam is not a situation to be regretted or otherwise looked upon as exceptional in any way. To be sure, there is a great disparity in fortune which, in these times, is not very wonderful." Colonel Fitzwilliam had colored deeply during this last volley, making every attempt to keep his composure and recall the courtesy to his aunt, despite her being, in the present situation, little deserving of any such civil consideration. At the earliest pause, he quietly but firmly replied, "Indeed, ma'am, you do me too much honor. As we are both aware, my low prospects as the younger son are not such that Miss de Bourgh's birth or person should merit. Whilst I am not insensible of the compliment of your proposal, I must decline out of my deference to my regard for Miss de Bourgh." "Nonsense," exclaimed Lady de Bourgh. "Whilst Anne is doubtless one of the most favored of her sex, she is approaching an age when it is desirable to have her well married, and I am convinced that she could do much worse," said Lady Catherine in a rare moment of compliment abroad. In addition to being a close relation, your modesty tells me you are sensible of your good fortune in securing such a wife. Therefore, we may consider the matter as settled. Indeed, Lady Catherine, cried Colonel Fitzwilliam, your persistence after my reply is astonishing. Whilst I have no doubt that my esteemed parents would regard an alliance with Mr. Bourg as in every way desirable indeed, I must beg leave to decide my own feelings, to say nothing of the consideration which is due those of Mr. Bourg, and her own views as to which course best constitutes her future happiness. Lady Catherine now dropped any veneer of civility, and in a quite different tone of voice responded, Fitzwilliam, you surprise me exceedingly. I should have thought that a man of your sense and experience in the world would properly credit the opportunity of such a connection. It is precisely the contrary, Lady Catherine. A man of sense and experience must be guided by his own judgment as to what constitutes his happiness, and mine is not to be directed by you or anyone else on this point. I will add especially when this officiousness comes in the form of great imposition and insult to my own feelings, and probably those of Mr. Bourg. Fitzwilliam, said Lady Catherine, you greatly mistake me. I did not call you here to inquire. Colonel Fitzwilliam could bear no more and interrupted her with some warmth. Ma'am, this application in any form is extraordinary. Indeed, you say that your daughter has long been disinclined to marry. Would your approval of our marriage necessarily change her preference for being single? I have known Mr. Bourg all of her life and have never once been honored by any mark of distinction or esteem in her behavior. Even were I to give my consent, would that make her consent more probable? In addition, I know not whether Mr. Bourg might have consented to a union with our cousin. In any case, her acceptance of me, as a substitute, must make a poor basis for marriage if she would accept me. No man would willingly stand in for another in such a case. The disappointed hopes of one and the declared inferiority of the other must render any chance for happiness wholly impossible. Fitzwilliam, unlike yourself, Anne knows her duty to me and will do it. She will rely upon my judgment, declared Lady Catherine, rising to her full height and speaking in accents of uncommon hauteur. Colonel Fitzwilliam now stood and picking up his gloves replied, even if this is so, Aunt, I should never wish to marry wholly out of duty, nor should I wish any such sacrifice for my wife, replied Colonel Fitzwilliam, every feature marking his disdain for Lady Catherine's insolence and continuing to press the subject. Fitzwilliam, in your case, it is more than duty. It is interest. As Darcy has refused the claims of family and friends, it is incumbent upon you to keep the fortune of Mr. Bourg from being estranged from the Fitzwilliam line. If that is your ladyship's chief concern, replied the colonel with evident disgust, I wonder you do not choose my brother for this honor. With that expedient, you would preserve both the fortune and the title. Lady Catherine paused for a few moments and appeared to select her own reply with unusual care, and in a somewhat softer tone and attempted a smile, continued, George, you greatly mistake me. I have only the happiness of my daughter as my object. Pecuniary conditions must and will always take a second place. Your brother has the title, yes, but I estimate your character to be the superior, and your habits are unexceptional, and your actions have always been those of a gentleman and a prudent man. A mother would always wish to see her daughter the wife of a respectable man. You mean to say, madam, Colonel Fitzwilliam replied angrily, that you estimate my character to be more tractable than my brother's, that I am weak and malleable, and that you are therefore more likely to succeed in obtaining my consent. I assure you that I am neither so weak nor so malleable, that my own future happiness is to be auctioned in this manner. Lady Catherine, I well understand that as the second son, I must give some consideration as to fortune, when and where I choose to connect myself. I am, however, quite far from seeing my own prospects so blasted as to require the services of another in finding a wife, especially one who uses insult and offense to both parties as a justification for interference. Fitzwilliam, cried Lady Catherine, do you then absolutely refuse to marry my daughter? Yes, Lady Catherine, I do. And allow me to say further that both the motive and the method with which this injudicious campaign has been waged has relieved me of any distress as may be comprehended in my refusal that I otherwise must have felt in your disappointment or in any unintended disrespect for Mr. Bourg. Pray give my regrets to Mr. Bourg on not taking my leave of her personally and my sincere wishes for her happiness. My refusal to accede to this preposterous plan is my best assurance for her ever being so. With the briefest of bows, Colonel Fitzwilliam turned and quitted both the scene and, within the hour, rose.